This is brought to you by Camarena, the most awarded tequila. We back like slow horses, season 4. Just us, two flatulent members of a dysfunctional team of outcast MI5 agents bonded by a love of football. Oh, like Gary Oldman himself, actually. Huge Manchester United fan. Poor bastard. It's week 3 of the Premier League season. And you might remember, dear listeners, we told the story. In fact, we urged you on the opening day of the campaign. We told you that in the olden days, aka when I was a kid, the newspapers didn't even bother to print a league table until 5 games in, because they said there was nothing to see at all before then. But let's be honest, 3 games in, I think we've seen enough to call it, at least in some aspects. If your team, say, has a 2-0 lead and is cruising into the 86th minute, and then somehow, completely and utterly, craps themselves with the world watching, then only the sweet relief of death will cure you, my friends. And I'm not alone to analyse all of this rationally, and by analyse I mean mourn, because it's a joy to welcome back, freed from the constraints of his RV in Europe, on Labour Day Monday, no less. It's a joy to welcome from the New York Times, where he is, the Frank Bruni of football. It's my friend, it's Mr. Rory Smith.
It's not Labour Day here. It's just the 2nd of September.
Mate, it is Labour Day wherever you are in the world, but only the Americans actually know it. Raw, the big question first, the one the world's waiting to hear the answer to with bated breath. Did you get Oasis tickets, love?
No, I didn't even try. We were travelling on Saturday, and I don't know. I would have loved to go. I was a huge Oasis fan as a kid. I probably still am a huge Oasis fan. I'd love to see what Noel Gallagher can do when he's not being a professional Man City fan. But the prospect of queuing and then being subject to, and I'm going to do the air quotes here, dynamic pricing, was too much for me to take.
Dynamic pricing, I welcome it, our future overlord. But here's why it's interesting too, because you did mention it. It's a fact. Is it that the Gallagher brothers are reuniting after like forever that people are psyched about? Or is it just that the British, famously a nation of queuers, that famous old quote, an Englishman, even if he's alone, forms an orderly queue of one. Is it just that the English loved having an excuse as a nation to just queue up again?
I think amazingly that might have been Britain's greatest queuing achievement. It's been a real week. I mean, it was just the ultimate queue. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people deep. That is, for a country that really loves a queue, that is just a great way to spend a Saturday. It's an orgy.
It's an orgy in many ways. By the way, we'll save the breakdown of that orgy for our other podcast, Today in British Queuing. But I did love the quote from @Chelsea Rory, who mocked the Ticketmaster delirium on Saturday by tweeting, "This Oasis situation is dumb. It should be a queue at Wembley Stadium ticket office overnight. True test of dedication, like what we had to do for the FA Cup final in 1997. All this internet wizardry is unjust. It favours the drips. Got people sending me pics of computer screens like they work at NASA. What chance have I got?" Oh, I love the past and I love the future. And I love the football. Let's get to it, Raw, and start with a toast. I do raise my third first Michelob Ultra of this Labour Day to the transfer window closing. That door, slamming sound, which tells all Premier League fans you got to stick with what you got till January. Honestly, the quietest summer transfer window in forever. I think Chelsea were only linked to 12 players on the last day. And aside from them, Ivan Toney to the Saudi Pro League, Godspeed. Napoli turning into Scotland with the arrival of little Billy Gilmore and that smiting fist of Scott McTominay. 2 outcasts in from exile. Jadon Sancho to Chelsea, Raheem Sterling to Arsenal, which I think is going to be fascinating. Raz pulling off the Anelka, which is a bit like an EGOT, but in relation to playing for Liverpool, Manchester City, Chelsea and Arsenal on your incredible career journey. Oh, the cut price punt on Federico Chiesa by Liverpool, Armando Broja when he gets fit for Everton. But big picture, Raw, quietness of the transfer window. Is it caused by a mix of financial fair play actually vaguely being rumoured to be applied, or the big clubs selling and not buying to try and comply, and all of that huge wage excess of the past decade leading almost to an impasse? Is it a quietness and lack of action? Is it a blip? Was this a one-off, or is this going to be the new normal?
Well, it's all relative. So the Premier League clubs still spent the second highest amount of money they've ever spent in the summer transfer window, according to Swiss Ramble, the finance blogger. So, it's not been completely dead. I think all the things you mentioned are factors. And the other one that I throw in that's a little bit more positive is that I think, maybe Chelsea apart, clubs are now a lot more conscious of only spending big sums of money when it's wise. You don't get a lot of those splurges that you saw maybe 5 or 6 years ago, certainly pre-COVID. So if you take Liverpool as an example, their abiding principle, which Ian Graham revealed in his book,
The Data King.
The Data King.
Just plug that book, because I'm reading it at the moment. It is fantastic.
Yeah, they asked me, they sent me an early copy and asked me for a blurb quote, and I suggested surprisingly funny for a physicist, which Ian really liked, and I thought was warm and friendly and stuff, because I like Ian a lot, and the publishers thought was a bit too oblique.
Didn't make it,
readers.
Did you, Ro?
No, didn't make it. It's outrageous. But he kind of makes the point that often when you've got a good squad, the smart play, if you can't find a player who improves that squad, the smart play is to stick with what you've got. And although Liverpool, I think, are probably an extreme example of that, it seeped into the thinking of a lot of teams. I think clubs generally know enough now to know when not to spend money.
When you've got Dwight McNeil, you've tasted perfection. Why go back into the market is essentially what I'm sure Ian Graham, if he's listening to this, is nodding, even as those words come out of my mouth. Ian Graham also shouting at his pod radio, saying, Rory Smith, great at plugging, terrible at blurbing. Godspeed. By the way, I do love the Raheem Sterling to Arsenal moment, Raw. It is. I mean, the fact that Chelsea are going to pay a lot of his wages. It's like that scene in Moneyball where my friend Billy Bean says to David Justice, no man, I ain't paying you 7. Yankees are paying half your salary. That's what the New York Yankees think of you. They're paying $3.5 million for you to play against them. It's magnificent.
I don't know how they've done this, but Arsenal seem to have struck a deal with Chelsea where Chelsea spend a lot of money on players and then after a while just give them to Arsenal. And I feel like that works really well for Arsenal and not that well for Chelsea. Sterling will do brilliantly at Arsenal. He's a really versatile player. He's a high-class player, really talented player. He's a winner. He's worked with Arteta before. He'll have a point to prove. He'll have a bit between his teeth. He's trying to go back home. He's from North London, from Wembley, which is just about Arsenal territory. Traditionally, he gives them so many options in so many different positions. He could be a real difference maker.
Raheem Sterling's redemption season. I am so there for this. But let's dive into the weekend that was, starting with a game at Old Trafford that left Manchester United fans feeling like, well, that US Open spectator who returned to his seat proudly and holding 2 honey juices, but was then, as he reached to give one to the unknown woman by him, beaten to the punch by another unseen man. I bet it was Luis Diaz swooping in with another honey juice cocktail. Pain, only pain. Manchester United fans, your team 0, Liverpool Football Club 3 in the 2 Dutch ball managers fighting over a comb derby. Ten Hag versus Arne Slot. Fascinatingly, those two are not friends, according to Slot anyway. Before the game he was asked, he said, friends is someone you see a lot and go out for dinner with. Erik ten Hag does not belong in that category. I love Dutch people. You ask them anything, they just tell you how it is. What we do know is that they were managers of the 2 biggest teams in the Netherlands before this. Now they are meeting again, Mr. Bond, at the helm of the 2 traditional winningest teams in English football. Erik ten Hag's United, a deeply flawed project, but still, we all felt this was going to be Slot's first big test for his self-admittedly work in progress, yet still perfect Liverpool Football Club. Ten Hag drew strength from the ways United tormented Klopp in his final season. We all remember that 4-3 NBA style humdinger of an FA Cup win. And United, history needs to remember, they started positively. Rashford and Dalot attacking Trent Alexander-Arnold. Erik ten Hag had promised his team that his fans would, quote, bring the fire. And Old Trafford at the outset was a cauldron. The noise was just even louder in the early excitement of a Liverpool goal given by goal line technology, then ruled offside for offside VAR. Trent Alexander-Arnold in between, charging towards the camera, kissing in tribute to Steven Gerrard 2009. 1 kiss is all it takes, because the second one's offside. Now, Raw, the great Albert Camus once said, everything seems futile here except the sun, our kisses, and the wild sense of the earth. But in this case, Even the kiss was futile.
Yeah, Salah slightly ahead of Luis Diaz, kind of touching the ball back to Alexander-Arnold. And it did feel at that point as though maybe United had got away with one who's a little bit strong, but kind of survived the scare, and it should have sparked them into action more than anything. Maybe a little sign that the fates were smiling on them, that they might have the rub of the green. It didn't quite work out like that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, again, United had so much fight in that first opening spell. Liverpool more composure, admittedly, but we have to acknowledge there was a period where the notes were like De Ligt giving a robustness at the base in his first start. There were so many moments where you were trying to emphasise United positives. Both teams' decision making was a little off, and then it was that one mistake that proved fatal. Casemiro, under zero pressure, striking the ball straight at the quite excellent Gravenberch, who just stormed forward, fed Salah, dinked it across. United defenders just do not see multiple opponents standing right at the far post in large gaggles. In this case, Szoboszlai and Luis Diaz. The two leapt together. Diaz headed home, resisted the urge to kiss the camera, said it wasn't ruled off. Learning. And one of the traits of Ten Hag's United is they don't cope well with adversity, because just 7 minutes later it would get worse for Manchester United. Same duo again. Casemiro makes, Liverpool takes. If you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. Your big square Brazilian coughing up the ball in the face of one of the best pressing teams in the league, then being woefully out of shape. Salah again arcing a tender cross, which Diaz stroked home first time. Raw, what was the mood like in the Smith house in that moment? Because as they say in Liverpool, that goal was sexual.
The mood in the Smith house was, as it always is when Liverpool are leading 2-0, which is they need 4 before I feel comfortable or happy. There were no risks being taken at 2-0. It's a dangerous scoreline, Rog.
Too soon.
I would quibble with your telling of the game just a little bit.
Please.
Because I am quite a negative football fan. I tend to see the worst in my own team, which I think is probably fairly standard. But even to me, in that first 40 minutes, half an hour, United they looked fine going forward. They were kind of okay. They were having moments. They weren't out of the game, obviously outclassed or anything like that. I agree, Liverpool had more control. But, United had a few little moments of danger. There were a few little glimpses of what they were trying to do. I'm not sure their attacking structure makes a huge amount of sense, which makes it very hard for them to finish chances off. But they also kept giving the ball away at the back. There were a load of, maybe half a dozen moments where you just thought, that's a really sloppy pass. And I started thinking before the first goal, is this because these players aren't very good? Is it kind of a technical fault in the players that under the pressure of that big game, because United-Liverpool is still the biggest game in England, and to be honest, it always will be, because of the 130 years of tradition that goes into it. That is the biggest game in English football, the English Classico. Is it the pressure of playing in that situation that's just exposing little flaws in these players? And, I think they're, De Ligt's a good player, Mazraoui's a really good player. They've signed well this summer. Casemiro's incredibly experienced. Kobbie Mainoo's the great hope of English football, all that stuff. Or is it that the way the team is set up is still nonsensical, even after all these years of Ten Hag? And that first goal, particularly, just seemed like it had been coming. Not so much that Liverpool were automatically going to score the first goal in the game, because it was a bit more balanced than that, but that if Liverpool were going to score, it was going to be because Man United gave the ball away in that exact position. Just to be honest, by that stage, it looked like they'd been trying to do it for a while.
Shapeless. A shame. We're catching United just so utterly disembodied. Arne Slot post-game summed up, backs up what you're saying, really. These are his words. He said, United's fullbacks, 9 out of 10 times, are really high. Casemiro comes in between. So if you pick up the ball and you can just keep Diaz and Mo Salah high, you're constantly in one-on-one situations. That was his simple game plan, and it worked over and over. Particularly worked because Casemiro, I think 11 giveaways in just the first half. Performance art in many ways, which really looked to me as the intentional opening of a negotiation to somewhere like Saudi Arabia, where the transfer window is still open. all that money spent by United, that's what's so fascinating. Manuel Ugarte, newly arrived defensive midfielder, now in for $65 million. He can't slide into the side quick enough. But with Casemiro, age 32, it was watching a man, the football has just bled out of him. It's just, we were watching a man for who, at the highest level, it's just gone for him, Raw. I mean, Casemiro to Wrexham, here we land.
Yeah, the thing is with Casemiro, that he was fine last week against Brighton. He was good against Fulham. Yeah, and there are times, and there have been times in his couple of years at United, where he has been more than good enough for the game that he's playing. You know, he can still mix it, and I don't mean this to sound like damning with faint praise, but he can still mix it in a game against a mid-table Premier League team. He's an incredibly good footballer, and he was one of the best defensive midfielders in the world for quite a long time. But as you say, against the best opponents, and Liverpool, although they are in transition, although they are a work in progress, although I think there will be more bumps in the road to come this season than maybe it feels like today, Liverpool are one of the best 9 teams in world football. And that's a high level. And at 32, Casemiro, I think, basically can't cut it anymore. It felt, even then, though, very, very significant that Ten Hag took him off for Toby Collier to make his Premier League debut. That is a big old call from Erik Ten Hag for a very experienced player. We saw Casemiro's wife, I think, post on Instagram after the game his trophy cabinet. That's who you're dealing with. That's not something you take lightly. And I'm the same. I find it very hard to believe that Casemiro's pride really would allow him to stay at Old Trafford if he feels that the manager has kind of pinned that entire performance on him.
Yeah, I've got to say, it's an incredible shot, black and white shot of the Casemiro trophy cabinet. I do have to point out, not a single Florida Cup in there.
Although, just on the trophy cabinet, so on the top level, you've got 5 Champions League trophies. Now, it is my understanding that the club is given the Champions League trophy when they win it. So Real Madrid get those 5. Casemiro shouldn't have 5 Champions League trophies. Has he had them made himself?
Yeah, if you've not been to the Lower East Side, you can get anything there. If you look at my cabinet trophy, I think I've got 4 Everton Champions League trophies that are in there? I've got to tell you, $150, baby, and I can get you the highest quality plastic Champions League trophy that money can buy. By the way, Toby Collier, 20-year-old, that's who he was replaced by. It's a very odd statement. The debut from the Brighton Academy, then the United Academy, Collier came through, and ultimately it made no difference. This time it was Mainu, second half, coughing up the ball in possession. Alexis McAllister, the dispossessor. Soboslai, the one running through the gut, feeding Mo. First time finish. Had to be him. 14 goals in 16 games against United. 7 straight games he scored at Old Trafford, which is just an ecstatic statistic. The Egyptian king... ... of Manchester. I spoke to him last week. You can find the interview on YouTube. I did say, Mo, you're born in Egypt. How is it that you proper hate the Manx? Which just led to him giggling and giving me a half answer, to be candid. He talks about his kids being Scouse Egyptian, which I just love. But that second half was really just a tribute to the gulf between these two teams, which remains staggering despite all the money that Manchester United have spent. By the way, I mentioned Ugarte, how the pressure is now on him. The latest player to be there with just one more big signing to complete our system away. It's a constant refrain. And I was watching the second half, I was like, maybe Klopp losing that FA Cup quarter-final, knowing then possibly Ten Hag would be kept on for another crap season, was ultimately galaxy brain thinking to sink United even further. I do think it's going to be a long, lonely international break for Erik Ten Hag. 5 goals conceded so far, just 2 goals scored, 2 losses in 3. He said to the press, I am not Harry Potter. He wishes he was Graham Potter. His team remain bereft of identity and ideas other than crap identity and terrible ideas. Really a footballing Harrenhal. And you have losses like these, 2 already this season. And that Ten Hag out narrative is just shoved back like a flapping piece of rotting skin or chum for the tabloid piranhas, as those owners, Raw, who've spent the summer investing in the players that manager wanted, are going to have to start wondering again, do we now still want to keep that manager? How do you understand this thinking?
Yeah, it's a remarkable situation for United to be in, really. They spent, I suppose, the late spring, early summer talking to a variety of managerial contenders, including United States manager to be, probably, Mauricio Pochettino.
I thought you were breaking news that they spoke to Greg Berhalter. I was like,
to be fair, they might have spoken to Greg. They may well have just picked Greg's brain.
Go for it, he said, please.
What are you thinking? Literally, what are you thinking? And then they decided we're going to give it to Erik ten Hag, and not only are we going to keep him in position, we're going to extend this contract. And I thought Jamie Carragher made a really good point on the British coverage of the game, that Gary Neville seemed maybe, let's say, willfully unwilling to understand. Neville kind of said, it's hard to appoint a manager. Liverpool had to get Slot, who was their third choice. I don't think that's true. I think Xabi Alonso was first choice, and then Slot was the leading contender outside of someone who had previously played for Liverpool. And then he gave the example of Bayern Munich ending up with Vincent Kompany, and that one...
Their eighth manager. Choice.
Gary Neville is correct. That whole process was a massive mess. And Carragher said, well, yeah, but they both knew, both those clubs, Liverpool and Bayern, knew kind of well in advance that their manager was leaving, even though certainly in Liverpool's case they didn't desperately want him to leave, and in Bayern's case it was kind of the manager's decision. Manchester United had a manager and went out to look for another manager, couldn't find one, and ended up giving a longer contract to the same manager who they had clearly thought about replacing.
And undermined in the process in the players.
Completely undermined. So you now have this weird situation where we know that Ineos, who are the people in charge of football operations at Man United, as recently as May, weren't that impressed by Erik ten Hag, because they were talking to other managers. Then they gave him a longer contract, signed a load of players that he wanted, and now it looks a bit like, well, nothing's changed, it's not got any better, and they're going to have another season, I assume, where every defeat basically brings more speculation about his future. And it's an incredible way for a major team, one of the biggest clubs in world football, to be run. And I don't quite understand how they've got themselves in this position. And the one thing I'm certain of is everybody attached to Manchester United needs to get out of thinking that one player solves the problem. Manuel Ugarte is a very good footballer. He is not the final piece in the jigsaw. It reminds me, I don't know, it's like a billionaire who's trying to find happiness by buying more and more things. Just if I just buy this one Bugatti Veyron, then I'll be happy. No. Do you know what?
You just described Chelsea Football Club. We'll get to them. We will get to them.
Surely at some point someone says, well, hang on, you keep saying you need one more player, and this player has to be fit, and this player has to come back, and we have to sign this player. But none of it ever worked. So at what point do we just have to say that you can't do this?
God. Raw, don't do that. Pogba's third coming is going to be
the dream.
Box office. From a Liverpool POV, at Ian from Iowa insted us and said, imagine having a bad ball Dutch manager instead of a good ball Dutch manager. Oh yes, it is that simple. Liverpool fans, I've got to say, their chants down the stretch were quite amazing. Liverpool taking the piss. Oh, they sang all the hits. Ten Hags at the wheel they sang, which was really an amazing moment. And then they capped it off by singing "You're Going Down" with the blue shite. Not clear if they meant Everton or Manchester City or both. Arne Slot, all we know is first big test passed with ease. The first Liverpool manager to win his first encounter with Manchester United since 1975, the great Bob Paisley. He used to live right around the corner for me, a very nice man. Honestly, could have been 4 or 5-0 to be honest. The perfect start continues. 3 games, 3 wins, 0 goals conceded. Luis Diaz on this day, a clinical warrior. Mo Salah, just, my God, what a master archer. Ryan Gravenberch, suddenly in the 6th position, a man reborn. What's your big takeaway? Early knee-jerk overreaction. Can you give us some? Liverpool, a City's true title competitors this season. You could say that, however, Raw, I am old enough to remember. A man many of you will have forgotten. His name's Ange Postecoglou. He went undefeated in his first 10 games last season, how we all believed, until injuries, suspensions, being found out tactically did them in, i.e. until he had to face true adversity for the first time, which Arne Slot has not had to do yet. And then we all know what happened there.
Yeah, I think it is a slightly different case, the Postecoglou, partly because I think Slot is a little bit more pragmatic. Postecoglou in that first kind of 2-3 months was very dogmatic. And look, I love Ange, but he was very dogmatic about how he was going to play. I don't think Slot's like that. I think Slot is much more willing to say, well, look, we'll take this bit and we'll do this bit, but against these opponents, it doesn't really work. Whereas Postecoglou, one of the things that held him back eventually was that teams worked out what Spurs were going to do, and Spurs never changed it. But the bigger thing is the quality of Liverpool's squad. Liverpool have got a much better squad than Spurs. They've got some incredible footballers. And even if there are points in the season where the system doesn't work, or the opponents have kind of worked out how to quieten them, you know, Mo Salah might score you a goal, or Darwin Núñez might do something nuts, or Luis Diaz will scrap one in for you. They have enough quality to do that. I don't think they will have that sort of drop-off, but I am slightly wary that everyone is saying this has been the perfect start. I think the first 2 games were the perfect start for Slot. Quiet, unspectacular, victories, no complaints, no problems, but not too much excitement. I think the danger now is that Liverpool's expectations get a little bit higher than maybe they need to be, because I don't think they're City's biggest challenges yet.
And Slot, even just one little fist pump he gave to the travelling fans at the end, he's learning.
It's the first step on the road to disappointment. You don't want to win football matches, Rog. It only sets you up to hurt later.
I know, believe me. My God. Happiness. Don't be fooled by it, kids. Do not chase happiness. All it does is just stick like a chicken bone in your throat. Take it from me. But I can say, it does look from the outside as if there is true joy at Liverpool, even with the big 3 players' contracts, Virg, Mo Salah, Trent Alexander-Arnold, all due to run out at the end of the season, which is a wheels within wheels subplot. To really witness Mo seizing the post-game interview to negotiate, reminding people this is his last year, which was fascinating to witness. Trent riling up the Liverpool fans by sticking 3 fingers in the air at every single opportunity. I do love Trent embracing his new kind of heel role, from a game with a knockout punch to one that I think only time will tell what the true result was, the true damage inflicted of the whole shebang. Up to North London, jumping back in time to early Saturday morning, and Arsenal won. Brighton and Hove Albion won. 2 teams who have played optimistic, rainbow and unicorn-scented football. 2 teams with maximum points before this weekend. Arsenal fresh off punching out their bogey team, Aston Villa, faced a fearless Brighton who, remember, had won at the Emirates on 3 of the last 4 visits. The only team Arteta had lost to more, Liverpool and Manchester City. That's where Brighton are. That's their weight class from an Arsenal perspective. I will say, watching Mikel on the sideline going hair helmet to hair helmet with 31-year-old, we have to say his age all season, right? Fabian Hürzeler. By the way, Raw, do you think when Hürzeler is like 73 years old, coaching like his 14th club, Gillingham in League Two, we'll still call him like 73-year-old Fabian Hürzeler? Is that just part of his whole vibe?
But in the same way as I still refer to Derby County as Wayne Rooney's Derby County, despite the fact he's no longer their manager.
Yeah, or there's some people in life, you've got your mates, by the way, not famous, but there's some people you always call by both names. Mike Dean, for instance, like it's got to be, it's never, Mike or Dean, it's Mike Dean. You always call first and last name. We will mention the 31 years old thing all season, right?
We will. I think we'll have to. To be fair, it is remarkable. He's 31.
Yeah.
It is. It's astonishing. That. And
I didn't know that, Ro.
No one's mentioned it.
No,
someone should have said.
See, that's why I love your facts.
It's so important for Hürzeler, given that he is 31, that they've had this brilliant start. Because I think we touched on this before. If he'd had a dodgy start, if they'd had a couple of bad results, the first thing that would have happened, not just in the press but among the fans, would have been, well, this guy's too young. This isn't going to work. This is too much of a risk. It's been too much of a jump. Yeah. A great start, and suddenly it becomes a bit of a game changer, as with Julian Nagelsmann, now the Germany manager, but who started coaching Hoffenheim in the Bundesliga when he was 7.
I mean, that's the future, is get your coaches before they've gone through puberty. That is certainly where Everton have gone wrong. But anyway, when Hürzeler got
no one has gone through puberty more than Sean Dyche.
I know. I smashed puberty. I went through puberty in womb. I looked at puberty and I laughed at it. By the way, I did. When Arsenal got booked in a game, I read him. I'm pretty sure he told the referee when he got booked, "The future's now, old man," in a high, cracking, squeaky voice. By the way, this is actually Hurtzler's first game against a truly massive opponent. So the storyline here was like, how aggressive would he be? And credit Brighton, because this is Brighton. We talk about Brighton as if they're minnows. We've got to remember their squad has been bolstered with $248 million spent on 9 incoming this summer. And that team, as he had in his first 2 games, Arsenal's quality ultimately gave them the initial edge, but Brighton soaked it up and picked moments in transition, getting stronger as that first half went on to prey on moments of Arsenal's sloppiness to Eminem, Minte and Mitoma. The game was really like an athletic stalemate towards the end of the first half until a mistake, 38th minute. Really quite extraordinary. 6'4" Lewis Dunk somehow outmuscled in a jump ball by 5'10" Bukayo Saka. Lewis Dunk on the crunk. It was like seeing Brighton's big get bodied by a tiny point guard. Saka fed the ball to a speeding Kai Havertz, a man who this time last season was just like described as German Chuck Knobloch. Floundering a loss, but now whacker, so confident. I mean, this is a Scotty Scheffler level kind of chip. Clinicality, confidence born from the fact he's been involved in 10 goals in his last 9 Premier League appearances at home. I mean, it felt great for Arsenal in this moment, but into the second half, another moment of madness. We've got to break it down raw. I know you'll have a theory. If you didn't see it, listeners, Declan Rice, stay with me on this, already on a yellow card. In real time, he gave a free kick away, was walking away, routine thing, nothing to see here, situ. But suddenly, when we watched it, it looked like he was just kicked by the free kick taker, Joel Veltman. He fell over in agony. On replay, you could see that Rice had just given the ball the tiniest of taps away. Such a surreal situation. As the players started to congregate, lobbying the referee, you could tell on the face of both players they didn't know if they were the victim or the subject of the ensuing investigation. It was referee Chris Kavanagh. He storms in. I thought he was going to do the kind of calm down, diffuse the situation, a lot of hand signals. But then you hear Danny Welbeck shout. You hear it on camera. You go, "Second yellow, ref." Takes out his red card, pointed at Declan Rice. Totally shocked Declan. Arteta had turned away, covering his face like Edward Munch suddenly had painted him. Arsenal Twitter immediately in agony. Conspiracy theories. Matt Scott wrote, "There's a reason Arsenal have only won 52.6% of our matches with Chris Kavanagh as the referee, as opposed to 71.1% with the other referees." I don't know where you are on all of this, Raw. Can you make it make sense? Come in with your ideas, your theories, your values.
I think the easiest way to make sense of the world, as we all know, is to engage in massive, complex conspiracy theories, taking everything in from 5G to the coronavirus vaccine.
It's why we watch.
So I'm going to say that Chris Kavanagh,
the referee,
has nurtured a deep-seated, long-rooted hatred of Arsenal since...
Was he the second shooter on the grassy knoll also?
His childhood in...
Manchester, somewhere
Stoke,
near Manchester.
Stoke, maybe. Maybe is he a Stoke fan who didn't like how Arsenal booed Stoke when they injured Aaron Ramsey? I don't know. No, it's occasionally you do get these slightly like administrative red cards, and they feel really odd to fans watching, and it's completely understandable that fans get annoyed by it and that teams get annoyed by it. But the PGMOL, the people who run the referees, the body who make the most important decisions in all of our lives, PGMOL said at the start of the season that they were going to be more kind of hard line on players kicking the ball away to delay restarts.
And they briefed all the players to this effect.
Told the players, told the coaches, told the teams. And look, the players and the coaches and the teams all have a lot of right to think, well, yeah, you say that, but you're not actually going to do it. Because that's what happens with most of PGMOL's initiatives, is they do them for a couple of weeks and they forget about them. And I'm sure that's what will happen with this. But at the moment, that's how they're doing it. I can understand why Arsenal are annoyed. It feels as though there should maybe have been a little bit of, well, he shouldn't really be sent off for that, should he, applied. It's a letter of the law rather than a spirit of the law thing.
Second yellow card, by the way. It wasn't that he was sent off for that. It was the second yellow card.
But the thing that I think is really interesting is that strikes me as being a rule that has been enforced not for sporting justice, because it's not a serious offence, but to ensure that the Premier League remains or is as compelling an entertainment product as it can be. It's a rule for entertainment, isn't it? If you delay the restart, you're denying the fans in the stadium and the TV audience at home entertainment. You're denying them the product flowing freely, which is what we watch the Premier League for. And it's really interesting. I think it's the first rule that I can think of that seems to have been beefed up with the view of football less as a sporting contest and more as an entertainment product. And that is my theory.
God, that's so interesting. By the way, a couple of quick things. Hard Knocks, if you're watching, listeners, this following the Chicago Bears in training camp, and the amazing scene when they brief Caleb Williams, the new quarterback, on the kind of predilections of every single referee he's going to face that season. And so, number one, Arsenal get on that. Because if Matt Scott's right and Chris Kavanagh, who is from Aston-under-Lyme, Greater Manchester, reportedly a fan of non-league Droylsden. I don't know what the Droylsden Arsenal beef is.
It's amazing how many referees support non-league football teams.
Yeah, so they say. So they bloody say. The ones who support Wrexham are going to have problems when they're in the Premier League, by the way. But, my God, it was a fascinating moment, really, of shithousery, because Declan Rice knew what he was doing when he tapped that ball away, but counter shithousery, not to get all John Le Carre on your ass. I mean, Veltman knew exactly what he was doing in choosing to swing through to kick and take advantage. I mean, this was ultimately it. This was classic shithousery and counter shithousery. And ultimately, that little kick by Rice, which set it off, a decision he'll want back. Without that, none of it would ever have happened. And I do think two things can be true. The ref could have had a word and diffused and calm, but Declan Rice also did something stupid on a yellow card in a big game. And deserves some of the blame here. GFOP at BHAFC stateside tweeted us, it's a life truth, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. You don't escape a yellow card because it was a tiny, tiny touch. Even with all the whataboutism, in the first half, how Pedro booted the ball after it went out of play, Kavanagh refused to give him a yellow. Or some people say Joe Linton clotheslined the Bournemouth goalkeeper and didn't get a red, but Declan Rice got one for a little tappity tap. I've got to say, ultimately he got one for being bloody stupid. But my biggest reaction, Rory, is Declan Rice clearly didn't pay any attention to the moral lessons of the pickpockets at the Arsenal dinner, did he, Ro?
No, and I think that is the real failing here, that maybe next time Mikel Arteta needs to get some better pickpockets.
Yeah, it's a failure of coaching and imagination.
Yeah, it's on. This is on the manager. He's not recruited the right professional pickpockets to go into Arsenal and talk to them. My main takeaway, this suggests that I'm not taking this incident hugely seriously, which is not an impression I want to give. So Rice's reaction to being given the second yellow was this incredibly pantomime performance of innocence. So he steepled his fingers in front of his face, and then he put them out, palms open, the gesture of trust, in shock, and then he dragged his mouth down to make it was open. It was really cartoonish. And I don't know Declan Rice, you've probably interviewed him, but he strikes me as being a perfectly normal, very sort of grounded individual. But it was this incredibly sort of hammy performance of what's happening here.
The whole thing was it's so beautiful. I love the pulling the lip down, the sad. You make it sound like my dog Martin Scorsese just doing that pantomime sad face.
But I don't believe that's how a normal human reacts in that situation. I just don't think those gestures...
I'm just suddenly turning into an elite mime. I love that notion that in that situation, you just suddenly, as an elite athlete, can turn into Marcel Marceau. By the way, Veltman too didn't know what was going on. If you really want to analyse that game film, there was a second as a referee came towards him. Neither Rice or Veltman knew who was the target of the investigation. Veltman for a second reached out, tried to pull Declan Rice up like, sorry mate, didn't mean to kick you. They were both mitigating, which you rarely see. You rarely see two players both trying to do things that would genuinely elicit sympathy. And thus, the first Premier League red card for Declan. And I think was it 245 games? Now out for the North London derby. That hurts. But even more immediately, his team down to 10 men. Arsenal yet to leak a goal all season. So all eyes suddenly on their impregnable back line. Could they hold out? The answer was yes, but only for 7 minutes. It was actually Lewis Dunk who redeemed himself with an incisive pass slipped between Arsenal's two heroic centre-backs. Gabriel, who was Lewis dunked off the ball by Minte, who slapped it off David Raya, and how Pedro ran in to drive home the rebound. What a mood change. The Emirates, the fume. Hello darkness, my old friend. Honestly, both teams had chances to win. There was Havertz on the break, incredible butterfly kick save by Verbruggen, down like some kind of Dutch Henrik Lundqvist. Ultimately, ended 1-1, final whistle, so many emotions for Arsenal fans. There was anger, there was relief, there was the referee's a wanker. I think that's a feeling, isn't it, Ro?
I think the problem is, for Arsenal, that they know from bitter experience over the last 2 years how fine the margins can be. We spoke last week about the fact that Aston Villa basically cost Arsenal the title last season. If Arsenal hadn't lost home and away to Villa last season, they may well have been champions. And they will know that come May, Man City might be 2 points ahead, they might be 4 points ahead, they might be 10 points ahead, but you can't afford to give them any breathing room, any oxygen, any light between you and them. You have to stay with them for as long as possible. I would suggest that the only way you can beat Man City to a title in the Premier League is to do what Liverpool did in 2019-20 and put your foot so hard on the gas that even City start to kind of not panic but feel the strain a little bit. Arsenal now have dropped 2 points before Man City have blinked. That kind of suggests that the initiative is with City, and I think, as with Liverpool over all those years when they were competing with City, Arsenal now feel so frantic and so desperate and so nervous about dropping points that any setback, even a 1-1 draw with Brighton early in the season, which is a perfectly acceptable result in slightly strange circumstances, feels like a sort of death blow. And that's the sensation of competing with Manchester City.
Yeah, I mean, I say we do need to acknowledge Brighton were excellent. And my lord, what a start to a season. Ipswich and Forest to come. Winnable games for that squad, that manager, that vibe. Thus far, the feel-good story of the season. I agree with you about Arsenal. I think they'll try and shape this as a tenacious point against an excellent opponent in difficult circumstances. As opposed to the kind of like 2 points needlessly riced away, but Spurs and Manchester City are next. I can barely wait. And Arsenal fans, programming note, fill some of the long, lonely international break by running, not walking, to find episode 1 of season 11 of the Men in Blazers TV show, which just dropped on NBC's Peacock. It's an Arsenal special with your director of football, Edu, your manager, Mikel Arteta, really a lovely, quite amazing human being, captain Martin Ødegaard. Find it on Peacock now. Massive point for Brighton, bigger point for Manchester City probably. There was Miguel Delaney tweeted, in normal circumstances you'd say that's 2 costly points dropped by Arsenal, except we've got no idea what the outcome of the Manchester City case will be. It's such a situation to have that weighing over the season. Objection! Overruled. Let's go to Manchester City, who were at West Ham. And it was the Hammers 1, Manchester City 3. What a game. Honestly felt so utterly inevitable. As soon as you read the stat midweek, West Ham have not beaten Manchester City in the Premier League since 2015. It's back when Erling Haaland thought he was a man born to release Norwegian hip-hop mixtapes. No surprise, on 11 minutes, Bernardo Lepta, on a Paqueta mistake, rolled the ball to Haaland. Who else? Finished, as is his wont. And City tore West Ham apart. They seemed so skittish every time they were attacked. KDB hit the post. City haven't conceded a goal on the road since April, so of course West Ham then went and scored without making a dent on XG. Bowen scampered down the right, drove across hopefully, and Ruben Dias, no one around him, just turned it into his own net. Cue the war bubbles. By the way, Ruben Dias's reaction, fascinating in the moment. Not typical of a man who just scored into his own net. Instead, he was stoic. He turned around, high-fived his teammates. It's actually the reaction of an invincible warrior, knowing that the scratch had barely borne blood and would just lead to more blood-curdling warrioring. And so it was. 11 minutes later, City just so guile-filled. Grealish back, I love that man. Rico Lewis majestic. Kevin De Bruyne cunning. Haaland, always Haaland. Here, he unleashed on the ball with a finish. It was this was less a football finish. The second goal was a startling act of violence.
Yeah, it was at the end of such a delicate move as well. You have this sort of balletic movement through the pitch with Man City's players kind of taking these precious touches of this wonderful orb that they cherish so much. And then it was the equivalent of like just an enormous bear coming along and smashing into it.
With a croquet mallet.
And it seemed to go through the goalkeeper rather. I'm not quite sure how it beat the goalkeeper other than if it sort of passed through his stomach. It was
By the way, listening to you describing it, that must have gone through the goalkeeper's stomach. It was hit that. In biblical days, I do believe this, Erling Haaland is the kind of human that biblical books would be written about the warrior Erling. He'd hit shots so hard they went through opponents' stomachs routinely, right? I mean, that was like, to me, when I read the book about Samson slaughtering an army with the jawbone of an ass, I've never quite been able to conceive of it until I've watched Erling Haaland hit a football. It is like the book of Haaland, chapter 1, verse 15, for when the creator finished his work, all that would be known afterwards was goals. That's kind of what we're watching now.
It'd be more like the creator finished his work and then blam.
Blam.
The Lord Erling smashed the ball as hard as he could. There's a
Use that word in the Bible. Blam.
There's a really famous, you might remember this, you'd probably moved by this stage, really famous advert in Britain for John Smith, the bitter.
The beer.
With Peter Kay, who's quite a big comedian over here. John Smith was trying to, portray an image of sort of normal manliness rather than being foreign or interesting or whatever. And it was all these players doing keepy-uppies, playing donkey or whatever, and clever little touches on the chest, on the thigh, on the instep, and then it sort of pans over to Peter Kay, and he just wallops it over a fence into next door's garden and goes, "Have it," and it was a very well done advert, and it was
Have it.
That Haaland goal, the second one was a little bit like that. It was kind of his Grealish, his Kovacic, and then along comes this enormous, like 1.5 scale human, and kicks it as hard as he can. And do you know what?
Have it.
Kicking a football as hard as you can is an underrated skill in football.
It is. By the way, blam. Can't get over blam. Just the Bible Batman crossover that the world's been waiting for. I don't know how you say blam in Aramaic, but it does seem to perfectly sum up the creation that is Erling. Blam. I mean, second half, there was more blam. West Ham, in credit them, they did play some bold stuff. Kudus, wrapped the bar on the break, but the more their belief surged, the more you shouted at your television, "It's a trap!" Because City only went full length of the field. Haaland, by the way, barely had a touch second half. I think he had 21 total all game. But then Núñez fed the ball. Too old. Have it! He shouted as he did. Haaland over the top, and it was Haaland lashing it past Fabianski again. Back-to-back hat-tricks, 70 goals raw in 69 Premier League appearances. Nice. ... Are we the Farmers League? Raw, I'm old enough to remember last season when British pundit Roy Keane called Haaland, quote, a League Two player. Now, rested. I mean, we've talked about him back-to-back weeks. I do wonder this. How do you think Mo Salah feels? I did want to ask him this, but I didn't have time. He scores like a brilliant man, but a mortal. He scores every game, Mo Salah. And then he comes back into the locker room and has to look at his phone and find out, holy crap, Haaland, blam, 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 scored 3 again.
The treble blam, the dreaded treble blam.
Yeah,
I actually think it has quite a significant effect on fans as well. That if you think about someone like Kai Havertz, who's had a long time, as you mentioned, kind of not being regarded as like a proper striker. He's not a proper striker, Havertz. He doesn't have the killer instinct. But as it turns out, Kai Havertz is actually quite a good goal scorer, and you can easily imagine Kai Havertz finishing this season on 22 goals, which is, in traditional times, biblical times, pre-Erling, pre-Book of Erling times, would have been like a perfectly good total for a striker to get. If you've got a 22-goal a season striker, that's great. That's really good. One every 1.5 games is spot on. That's a great strike rate. But then you have this guy at the head of the top scorer charts who scored 407 goals, and it does make you think, well, all these other people must be rubbish. And it's kind of a domestic Premier League version of what Ronaldo and Messi did for so long, in that the numbers that Haaland is creating, the numbers that he's producing, are so unrealistic by anybody else's standards that they actually kind of skew the way that you view basically every other player, and that's actually it's something we should probably hedge against a little bit, I think.
You mean in the chance? Oh, he can only score 25 goals a season. He's not for us. I will say for West Ham, facing City, it's like giving a rock to Sisyphus. That's where we've gotten to, and being like, "Hey, go on, lads, up the hill." It's now 9 excruciating years since they beat Manchester City, 18 game winless, which also, to your point, speaks volumes about modern football. But yeah, again, another weekend is Haaland's weekend. The chef's kiss of it all, Saturday night, Erling posted a photo of himself flying to meet up with his Norwegian teammates for their international break with the match ball on his private plane. You will remember, dear listeners, maybe last week one of his teammates from City wrote on his hat-trick ball, "I'm sick of writing on these balls in large footballer handwriting." This week, similar handwriting, it just said in large letters, and I'm paraphrasing, "F off," on a ball that Haaland will treasure for his entire life. That is how humdrum his hat-tricks are becoming. And from managerial joy to managerial sadness. Oh, Newcastle 2, Tottenham 1. Why, Lord? Why? Powder keg clash made for American fans who deplore the lack of scoring because the marketing geniuses / Premier League writers marketed this game as the Premier League fixture that's never finished, 0-0. So we knew one thing only, there'd be goals, and, well, we also kind of knew Spurs would lose. Big Ange, so poor on the road, just 3 wins in his last 14 away league games because, well, he refuses to bend the knee to the Premier League conventional wisdom that away teams should sit tight, just lock down the back, play more conservative football. No, Ange, he just goes for it, and so you get games like last season, that 4-0 loss in this very fixture, and so it came to pass, a game that was hammer and tongs. Even the linesman pulled a hamstring. Newcastle charged forward with adrenaline. Spurs snapped back with some elegant possession, peppering Nick Pope with a series of long-range fizzers. But just as they started to feel emboldened, Newcastle struck. Just wonderful team play. Cut Spurs high line apart. Lloyd Kelly located Harvey Barnes, arrived late in the box, opened up his body with relish. Cue archery. Assume the position, Spurs fans. Your team on the road are just Everton in disguise. I joke, but Tottenham, I think, has only won one of the last 29 Premier League away games. When trailing at half-time, they did make a change. Son moved to the centre to be a sharper blade, and on came Brennan Johnson, and it paid immediate dividends. Johnson picking up some Nick Pope slop, driving the ball across the goal, and Big Dan Burn. Raw, you got to explain this one to me. No one around him, just kind of lolls, smashed the ball into his own net. It was like Big Ange couldn't get his own players to find a finish, so he brilliantly coaxed one from Big Dan Burn.
It was a very odd kind of own goal, because it had been coming and Spurs did deserve it. And the attack itself had gone on for about 6 minutes, and you could understand why Newcastle's defenders were feeling a bit frazzled.
Just F it.
Well, I just wonder if after a while, if you're having to you're retaining your position, track your man, do this, do that. Oh, they're coming again, get rid of it, they're coming again. After a while, maybe you do start to the synapses stop firing.
Yeah.
And you get into a position where you're basically on the goal line, and your body is telling you, I should take a touch here. There's no one near me. I can take a touch and just guide it out of the box. But part of you is so frazzled and so panicked by what's been going on that you think, this round white thing brings fear and shame to me. I need to get rid of it.
Oh, it's a shame spiral for Big Dan Burn.
So it was like a sphere of shame that he was in. And you just want it to not be near the goal anymore. So you think the best way to do that is to Peter Kay have it as far as I can.
Peter Kay have it.
And it just ends up in the back of not even the back of the net, the roof of the net. The best own goals go to the roof of the net.
The self-blam is the saddest kind of
He's
blam.
blammed all over himself.
I will say, when we all post EA Sports FIFA glitches, when the new game comes out, just realise they are not glitches. They're just tributes to this Big Dan Burn moment. Spurs suddenly ascendant. Game played in and around the Toon box. So, of course, the only truth of football is it always makes a fool out of you. Suddenly, with the high line playing at the halfway line for Spurs, Joe Linton pounced, freed Murphy on the jailbreak, tore into the suddenly vulnerable Spurs area, rolled the ball to Isak, who finished with the aplomb of, let's just say, Big Dan Burn. I mean, the look on Ange's face in Liverpool, and we call it bare arse smacked. I mean, it could be worse, Spurs fans. You could support Everton. 20 shots, no goals from your own blokes. Really the ghost of Harry Kane, replaced by the great Richarlison, and now an already injured Dominic Solanke, means it's going to be a long international break for Ange, who will have to think, after one season and 3 games, Roy, you kind of hinted at this early, can he be wide? It's a bit of a leading question. Can he be this wide open week after week after week in the big leagues?
It depends a little bit on what his bar for success is. If Spurs win more games than they lose or draw, more games than they don't win, and they get into the Europa League, they compete for the Champions League, and the fans are entertained, then it's kind of all right. But if he wants to, let's not say the title, let's say qualify regularly for the Champions League, this probably ultimately isn't the way to go about it, because Spurs are too vulnerable. They will drop too many points, and the competition is too good to allow teams that much leeway.
Talking about London clubs, it's like, what is going on? Chelsea won, Crystal Palace won before the game. Jadon Sancho, the latest player to be presented to a now slightly bemused home crowd. Chelsea manager Enzo Maresca's strange garbage can filled with money set on fire art project continues. Evermore seems to be like something that performance artist Marina Abramovich, the woman who has people lining up to stare at her in an art gallery for 24 straight hours, or invites them to pick up objects from feathers to whips and do whatever you like to her in the name of art. Chelsea seem to be something that Marina Abramovich would dream up. Just so many players, so many limbs, just so much madness, as we'll discuss. The game began. Chelsea opened the scoring with a storming piece of team play. Cole Palmer again with the assist, finished from $39 million down the drain. Nico Jackson scores again. 16th non-penalty goal for Nico since the start of last season. Same number as Saka and Rashford combined, haters. Nico celebrated, hand in pocket. Turkish Olympic shooter pose, tribute Selly. Palace though, they've lost Elise, but they still have Eze. And my lord, what a storming footballer he is to me. Is he, Raw, the best footballer creatively outside of the big 6? And I know it's really a big 8, Raw. I mean, his first touch is just so instinctively brilliant.
Is he the most creative player outside of the top 7 or 8? He probably is, isn't he? I can't think of anybody who would necessarily overtake him off the top of my head. I
think Ian Graham shouting Dwight McNeil at his pod radio as he listens to us. How could we forget Dwight Mack? That finish was a work of art though. I don't know how Chelsea resisted the urge to just buy him on the spot, right?
I'm sure they haven't resisted. I'm sure that they immediately, as the ball was sort of arcing round Robert Sanchez, someone was making a call to Eberecie's agents. It's great that he stayed at Palace for another season. It is slightly surprising that it's happened. I guess what most clubs will be watching for is, can he stay fit for the majority of the season? That's always been the one thing I think that's probably been held as a question mark. But when he's fit, when he's firing in a team that's playing well, as Palace are, despite the fact it's not been a great start to the season, he's a wonderful footballer to watch, and he's an incredibly dangerous player to have, as illustrated by the greatest goal that never was last week. You know, he's inventive in a way not many players are.
He's just a wonderful, wonderful human being. And if you're listening, Eze's agent, use Chelsea's money, but make sure they send you right to Arsenal and just cut out the middleman. By the way, with new manager Enzo Maresca, a lovely man, but just like, I mean, he's got the game ended with him just flinging on one piece of day trader required talent after another. I think they threw on João Felix, Mudryk, Christopher and Kunku. And then he finished off post-game by negging his own team, which seems to be a strategy. He said, now we are not that kind of Chelsea, so sometimes if you don't win, it's normal, which is just an incredible thing for a manager to say after an outlay of more than $1 billion. It still is that kind of Chelsea, Enzo. The only variation, here's my question, Raw. How is it expected that Maresca can ever find any kind of cohesion? I mean, it's a squad where everybody knows by now they are completely and utterly replaceable. They're literally buried alive in human footballing limbs. It's a club built on panic and rumour, in which no one can feel safe.
The irony is that if you look at the team that Maresca's starting to put together, there is a kind of cohesion and a logic to it. So you have Wesley Fofana and Levi Colwill at the back. There's nothing wrong with that. Malagusto at right back has really come on. I thought he was a little bit inconsistent when he first joined, but he looks good now. Enzo and Caicedo in midfield, that makes perfect sense. And then you have the kind of the rotating cast of 6 to 7 forwards. And to be honest, that's not really any different to all of the other major teams. They've got the same sort of resources, the same sort of quality and depth. The two differences with Chelsea, one is all of those players are contracted until the sun consumes the earth, which feels like a problem. And two is that I don't think any of those players will be thinking, I bet we'll have a nice quiet January transfer window. I bet they won't try and sign any more replacements. That must create a load of uncertainty, and it must almost kind of foster an environment of distrust of the club, of not being entirely certain of how valued you are. I mean, there will be some of those players who think, I've got this multi-million-dollar contract until 2033. I don't really care. I'll just keep trying my best. But others, I think, will feel naturally in some way just a little bit unsettled by the weirdness of the situation they're in.
Essentially, Raw, that was you just saying yes to my question,
yes.
But I loved it. Yes, in great detail. Let's quickly round out the Champions League contenders by going to Leicester 1, Aston Villa 2. Ollie Watkins still shaking off the post-Euros rust goals. From my former lover, Amadou Onana, and 20-year-old West Ham fan, Johnny Duran. An immense header, incredible movement and power. It was Chris Wood-esque. Made it 2 wins out of 3. And for him, 2 match-winning goals in 3 substitute appearances, leaving Villa fans singing, we're on our way to the Champions League. Heady days for Villa fans. I will say nice to see Jacob Ramsey back, looking effervescent. If you only find 1 goal this weekend, check out Onana's. It was brilliant set piece. Like the equivalent of an NFL onside kick. 2 runners essentially came from deep, totally confused the Leicester backline who didn't know who should pick up whom. It was really an onside kick of the gods, big brain football. Raw, I don't know why we don't see more kind of intricate and creative free kick routines. I do believe it is football's future.
So I am also interested in this subject, and I think the answer is that lots of teams have intricate, complex free kick routines, but they only use them once. So I remember talking to Rafa Benitez about the corner that Liverpool used in the 2007 Champions League semi-final against Chelsea at Anfield, which was
lads,
basically...
if it worked, you can probably bring it back out again. You're safe to say only Ross Smith can remember this one. Go on.
So it was probably Steven Gerrard passed it basically along the ground to the edge of the box where Daniel Agger had come out of the penalty area and swept it home. Liverpool score. And Benitez said they practiced that, the exact pattern of movements and blockings and all that stuff that would need to happen. They'd been practicing it on and off all season, basically. They'd come up with this routine, someone had conjured it, and they were waiting for a time to use it. And they figured, well, look, we might as well give it a go in a Champions League semi-final. What better time is there? And what Rafa said was that once you've used one like that, you effectively have to shuffle it to the back of the pack, because teams will be prepared for it. They'll recognise the signs of it coming because they're all kind of analysing each other so much. They know what you've got in your locker in terms of set pieces. So I think they do have lots of, maybe not lots, they'll probably have a dozen specialist routines that are quite complex, but they wait to deploy them until it really matters.
I think Everton have got one, which is knocking it in the vicinity of Tark, having him head it wildly over and then run back with his hand over his mouth giggling. I do think it's safe 17 years on to bring the Agger routine back, Liverpool Football Club. In other games, Nottingham Forest won, Wolves won, first big boy point of the season for Wolverhampton in the Nuno Espirito Santo Memorial Derby. Chris Wood's header, one of the stealth joys of the season, heads it from so far away. He is that kind of player that would have thrived in the 1980s, a bit like Andy Gray at Everton, who used to joke that he'd take penalties with his head if he could. Brentford 3, Aaron Ramsdale, Southampton 1. No Ivan Toney, no problem for the Bees, and Mbumo and Wissa, like the poor man's Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Southampton manager Russell Martin continues to play his optimistic out-the-back football and continues to be punished when his team make mistakes in the unforgiving Premier League crucible. They're one of 2 teams in the 0 points club. We'll get to the other one in a mo. Ipswich 1, Fulham 1. In their first true test, first game, not against Liverpool or City, in which they could have expected to get something. They did. This one popped off early doors, 15th minute, Liam Delap. Yes, old fans feel older. Long throw king, Rory's son. picked the ball up just inside the Fulham half, drove up the gut, lashed one past Burnt Leno. Kind of like a spike, a volleyball spike of a goal. You wonder why there's not more like it in football, to be honest. A moment that saw Pullman Road erupt into the sound of 1,000 full-throated, joyous tractors. But just 17 minutes later, in what was, after all, the home of the 8th Air Force during the Second World War, that streaking Scouse American, Anthony Robinson, burned up East Anglian left like a P-51 Mustang, slung one across for creatine Cristiano Adama Traore, who levelled the score. No more goals, but this was a full-throated affair, a lot of tackles, thick and fast. Ipswich didn't look overawed against their first mortal Premier League opponent of the season. They're out at the relegation places for now. Kieran McKenna will draw strength. He can say, my team were not overawed by Liverpool. There were spells when we didn't get vaporised by City, and can show we can hold our own. Raw, if you were to pick one team in the bottom half who's impressed you knee-jerk wise on the evidence of the first 3 games, who would it be and why?
I think Ipswich will take a lot of heart from that point against Fulham, definitely. But I'd say plucky underdogs Manchester United. No, I think the ones that you'd maybe single out as feeling that they're in a slightly false position are probably Palace. I think Palace have been better than their lead position suggests. They were excellent in spells against Chelsea. They were deservedly beaten, but they weren't poor against Brentford. And I think that position is not anywhere like where Crystal Palace will finish. So I'd pick them as kind of the team who I would expect to move the most. Obviously, United will finish 5th or 6th or 7th or something, but Palace, I think, will be better than their first 3 games have suggested.
The thing I love about Palace, now they've got Eddie Nketiah joining them, born in Lewisham. They've got Eze, born in nearby Greenwich. They've got Gahey, grew up in Lewisham. Nathaniel Klein in Lambeth. Also home spot of Chaloba, who's just arrived. I just love the truly authentic nature of that club. I remember the days of football, and by that I mean the 1890s, when the teams really were represented by players who were born in that city, and the fact that Palace are taking it back, they have just an authentic South London brand, and I think it's magnificent. It's time though, Raw. It's for us both to wander into the Valley of Death. Are you ready? Everton 2, Bournemouth 3.
I'm ready, but I worry about you.
Don't worry, I'm dead already. What is dead may never die. This honestly didn't feel a thing. Champions are giving up 2-goal leads in the 87th minute. You'll never sing that. Let me remind you, dear listeners, Everton have not won a Premier League game in August since 2021 with neither Leos nor Virgos. I think if you're still listening, you probably know what happened. We took a 2-goal lead, and Dai, our new signing, one of the single most creative, instinctive, maverick performances I've seen in modern Everton. It was James Rodriguez levels, possibly the most Everton player I have seen in the 2020s. He's actually unbelievably good at football. It all felt so unbelievably golden. For 86 minutes, Michael Bloody Keane opened the scoring. I've never said a bad word about you, Michael Keane. All right, I kind of have. But what a feeling. It was just like, is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? Mopé could never. Then Dominic Calvert-Lewin finished a finely crafted move. This really happened. DCL, we know he doesn't want to be with us. He's not always the best at football. He is, I can tell you, just the most fantastic smelling footballer I've ever encountered. And it felt like on this day we bringing sexy back. There was a moment, by the way, I did feel sorry for the Bournemouth Golden War Cherries. I did. I felt for them. But I also, when we went 2-0 up, I turned to my wife. I'm always filled with a dread when Everton build up a lead, because then we got something precious to lose. And I just said, oh my God, what have we done? And she said, don't be stupid. It was so delirious. It was, as Oasis tweeted, the stars have aligned, the great wait is over. We had no idea. 83rd minute, and Dai walked off to a standing ovation. I got up off my couch, I clapped along. How little did I know, Raw, that death was on the horizon. What happened next? It wasn't football, Raw. Maybe you can explain to me in football terms, but it felt like, the closest thing I can think of is like watching a ship be sucked into a whirlpool when you're on the shore and there was nothing you could do to stop it, just watch all hands on deck going down. That's what happened.
I don't know if there is a sporting explanation. I don't know if there is a way of explaining what happened in a technical sense. I don't think it was a tactical shift by Iraola. He said after the game that Everton were the better team for 87 minutes.
He said we were terrible.
And then I suspect what happens is Bournemouth get the first. They get a little bit of a pick me up, a little bit of a lift, and I think Everton probably just panic, and suddenly the whole world collapses around them.
It was like goals just seeming to just pour into one after another, just blurring unstoppably. Honestly, Bournemouth could have had 5 in this time period. Lewis Cook. He's 5'9" with the header. The winner from Sinisterra, 5'8", snow falling on snow, goals falling on goals. We are dead. Big life lesson, obviously. Do I need to say this to you, young listeners? Just learn the moral lessons of this moment, which is don't dream. Dreams are dangerous. Dreams come back to smash you in the face and just choke in your throat. Do not listen to grown-ups. Dreams are for losers. Actually, dreams are for winners, and we're losers. By the way, for Bournemouth, I've got to say, so poor for 86 minutes, but big love to you. First win after 2 draws. But for Everton, chuckles. I'm in danger. Sean Dyche has delivered just 5 wins in 259 days. This was, he said, the most frustrating defeat of my career. He's had wins. He cured puberty. For me... by the way, the worst was honestly that I expected that. I always expect, even when something nice happens, I expect to be needing the down below. So this didn't shock me. But then my kid's text came rolling in for my second one. Bear, he was the first. He just texted, "Why did you do this to us, Dad?" And within a second, my oldest son, Samson, who called me Dad Bro in the text. He's never called me Dad Bro before. I don't know where it comes from, and I hope it doesn't stick, but it was a thing. He wrote, "Dad Bro, I feel so sad." Raw, am I a terrible parent, or am I the worst parent?
I think you're a wonderful parent, because you have given your children something through which they can learn how to deal with the brickbats of life. This is, what better preparation could there be for a cruel, uncompromising, heartless world than supporting Everton? And, worst comes to worst, if you need to vent any of it, you can just go and stand on a train station and shout at some men you don't know. God,
that is healing. Screaming at Everton players about to board the train. Nature is healing. Can I just say, there was a line in Dante's Inferno, I think it is, there is no greater sorrow than to be mindful of the happy time in misery. I think what Dante meant was the worst human feeling is to, when you feel terrible, is to remember a happier time. And we had happy feelings. DCL scoring. It felt like we were all in a Katrina and the Waves cover band and we could only play Walking on Sunshine for the whole gig, but it did feel amazing. And I've got to say, I'm not worried about Everton. Still, we've got so much worse things still to happen to us, much worse than leading by 2 goals until the 87th minute and somehow still losing. The worst collapse in Premier League history. And we have Aston Villa next, a battering awaits. I can actually see I dreamt last night of David Moyes 2, Electric Boogaloo. David Moyes coming into that redemption story to save us will be amazing. But for now, there was a great tweet sent out by a blue that captures the current mood. Neil Maupay, that little rat bastard, he got his transfer day move away to Marseille, celebrated by posting the Shawshank Redemption freedom meme. What an arsehole, little turd shithouser. 1 goal you score for Everton in 29 games. And an Everton fan, at Eli Bretland, quite beautifully wrote, "The level of dislike Neil Maupay has for Everton actually makes him one of the biggest Evertonians to have played for the club." He gets it. This is where we are now, Raw.
I saw that tweet too, and it's a great tweet. Yeah, Neil Maupay's a fascinating character. I'm not quite sure it's a great look for him. I'm surprised by how bad Everton's start has been. I think losing at Spurs is losing at Spurs. That's not a big deal. Brighton have had a great start, so you can maybe just about excuse that. There is a way you can present this as just like a freak, one-off, lightning strike thing. But the pattern of the 3 taken together is making me think that my general view that Everton would be fine this season and actually quite boring might be wrong.
God, I used to work in a homeless shelter in Chicago, and the movie the guys who stayed there used to love to watch was Die Hard, but they'd only watch like the first 20-25 minutes when Hans Gruber took over the tower. They loved that. They didn't like when order was restored in the back half of the movie. I think this game, when viewed through that, just stop it at 86 minutes, North Korean football broadcasting style, was a massive win. That's what I'm going to tell myself through the international break, which, by the way, is an odd break in momentum. Start to the Premier League. I've been handed a whole new box of Thin Mints and then told by your extremely strict host you can only eat one. I don't know how you feel about it, but apart from the soon-to-be announced Mauricio Pochettino, I do feel a little bereft. So a question to end for me. Great GFOP, Ian Scarborough from Trenton, I think that's New Jersey. He wrote, international break, it's like a reading week for me, like it used to be in college. Both of you sound like literary minds. I think he meant you, Raw. He wants to know, what book changed your life? Whoa, Raw, lofty question. The book that changed Rory Smith's life. Did you blurb it? Did you not blurb it? Did you blurb it and not get taken up on the blurb? Let's find out.
People don't like my blurbs. They're just too sarcastic. That's a really good question. I suppose from like a professional sense, the book that changed my life is called Football Against the Enemy by Simon Cooper.
Oh, me too.
And that was the kind of book that made me want to write about football and think about football in the way that I do.
Me too, Raw, by the way. If you've not read that book, Simon really was the first writer we've not rehearsed this. I didn't know that. Simon was I actually wrote to Simon when I read that book. He wrote about football. First time I'd ever read socio-economic, a reflection, a mirror to the world that surrounded it. But Raw, you were about to say another book.
Equally, I'd say that it maybe didn't change my life, but if you want a soccer-related book to read...
It doesn't have to be soccer, Raw.
I would. Well, I'm assuming that's the kind of general vibe.
I think they're looking at you as just a man of letters.
So, in terms of football, I'd say This Love Is Not for Cowards, which is a book about football in Ciudad Juarez in Mexico by a journalist called Robert Andrew Powell, and it's amazing. It's the best football book I've ever read by quite a long way. Well, it's not. Do you know what? It's not the best football book I've ever read by quite a long way. It is the best football book I've ever read by a bit. But the last time I said by a bit, Robert Andrew Powell heard and got slightly offended. So I'm going to say
that it was just by a bit. Is that what he said?
I think he was jokingly offended. But I want to make it clear that I really like his book.
Robert Powell, meninblazers@gmail.com if you want a vent about Rory's slightly lovely words that you did not take well. What about non-football books, though, Rory?
I have been reading... I'm reading Carl Chater's Filter World at the moment. That's really good.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's fantastic.
I also really like... My wife hates them, but I really like the works of a British author called Stuart Turton, who writes these like mind-bending thrillers. They're a good way to spend a bit of time in a boring international week.
Get on it, Turton. Have it, Turton.
I'll tell you what book has probably influenced my thinking on everything more than anything. Entertaining Ourselves to Death by a scholar called Neil Postman.
Oh my God. The great Neil Postman.
And there is another one called Life the Movie by someone else who I think is Neil Gabler, and they are both brilliant books. There you go. That's a list.
Rory
it's a reading list.
Loves any book by anyone called Neil. By the way,
just love Neil's. Neil Mopay, Neil Postman.
Yeah. Well, by the way, Neil Mopay. The thing I did love about him when he signed, Neil Mopay actually does read books. That is the thing about him. Neil Mopay is one of the rare footballers who talks, and I mean. God, you're making me miss Neil Mopay now, you bastard. By the way, to answer your question very succinctly, for me, it was a book of World War I poems, Men Who March Away. It was an anthology that my teacher, Mr. Stott, who was an awful bastard, he used to make us memorise when we were like 7 or 8 years old. Incredible poems by great poets, Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, just incredible war poets. Poems about suffering and death, of being gassed on the battlefield, and he'd make us, when we were 7, we'd have to learn them, and then he'd make us one after another come up and recite them from memory, and he'd cry, he'd sob, as we read lines like, I can still remember them, gas, gas, quick boy, and imagine this in a high voice, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets on just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. I mean, this poem goes on and tells in exquisite detail what it's like to die from mustard gas, and as sick a man as Mr. Stott clearly was, maybe his method was these poems he knew would teach me, well, for me, what I took about them is that you could convey human emotion and human suffering through words, which ultimately I think I do every week on this podcast. But Raw, maybe Mr. Stott was trying to prepare me to report on Everton every single week, possibly, don't you think?
I think maybe you're looking into it too deeply, and maybe what Mr. Stott was trying to teach you was try not to die by mustard gas.
Yeah, one life truth, lads. If that's all you get from your 7-year-old English class, don't die of mustard gas, and my work here is done. Mr. Stott, if you're listening up there, or probably down there, I imagine that's where you are. You were really an awful man. That's it for today. The international break is upon us. Football don't sleep, and neither do we. We got Jesse Marsh, yes, America's greatest gift to Canada, coming to join us on Wednesday to talk about the forthcoming Barnstormer US men's national team against Canada, which is on Saturday. Got Hercules Gomez previewing it. Tyler Adams will also be joining us this week. Keep tuned to our social media for more. I'm actually off to Chicago at the end of the week to watch Caleb Williams' first game and the Super Bowl season begin to unfurl with my own eyes. Oh, Raw, so much love to you, and huge thanks, mate.
It's been a pleasure. Enjoy your international break.
Oh, Godspeed. Come on, the United States. This is Rog sending you big love. Let's not take a second of watching football together for granted. Courage.